He stopped the bus and he tied up the teachers, trapped inside a bus, and a man screaming that no one is leaving alive. "You're all going to die!" The driver allegedly set the bus on fire. Remember when you were 13 years old? You were not old enough to drive. You're not old enough to vote, and probably still arguing with your friends about what video games or homework or what football action to do. And suddenly one normal school day turns into something that feels like a nightmare movie. A bus driver that locks the doors, and he pours gasoline everywhere, and he starts screaming and that nobody is going to survive. And inside that bus, terrified children were genuinely believed that they were about to die. But then one kid does something unbelievably calm, smart, and brave that saved 51 lives. And what makes this story even crazier is that this same kid wasn't even officially considered a citizen of the country he saved. So let's talk about the story of the 13-year-old Ramy Shehata, the boy who became a hero in Italy. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Daniel Tells Stories, the channel where we dive into real stories around the world that feel too emotional or too intense, or honestly, just too unbelievable to be real. And today's story is one of those moments that genuinely sounds like something out of a thriller movie, except this one actually really did happen in real life. So if you enjoy survival stories, kindness stories, hero stories, and real moments that restore your faith in humanity, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because every week we talk about stories that stay in your head long after the video ends. And also, if you haven't checked out my other videos, definitely go watch them wherever they are, somewhere this way, because trust me, some of those survival and kindness stories are absolutely insane. Alright, so let's talk about this story. Now, here's the thing that makes this story even hit harder. Ramy Shehata was a regular 13-year-old kid living with his family in Italy. His parents came from Egypt years earlier, and Ramy himself was actually born in Italy, raised there, went to school there. He basically grew up there, because Italy was the only home that he truly knew. But despite being born there, despite speaking their language and their culture and understanding everything around him was Italian, he officially did not have Italian citizenship. And honestly, that detail becomes incredibly important later in the story. Because sometimes life creates moments where a person proves exactly who they are without needing a passport or document to define them. And Ramy was about to prove that in the most terrifying way imaginable. So here's where the story takes suddenly a dark turn. One day, Ramy and a dozen other students were coming back from a school sports activity in Milan, Italy. It was a normal school day after a game. It was a normal bus ride. You know how it goes when if you've ever been on a bus with kids. They're talking, they're laughing, they're being rowdy in the back, and everyone is probably tired after the game. So nothing unusual. And then, suddenly, the driver started acting strange. Now imagine this moment from this perspective of a child for a second, because I think adults sometimes forget how terrifying situations feel when you're young. At first, you may think just the driver's joking. Maybe he's angry and shouting at you, "Stop it, stop it!" Or maybe something weird is actually happening. But then things escalated fast. The driver, a man named Usanyusi, suddenly rerouted the bus away from its normal destination. He allegedly began to threaten everybody on board. He stopped the bus and he tied up the teachers. He took all the phones away from the students. Yeah, he tied up the teachers and took their phones. And imagine me as a teacher. I've been in situations where you're on a bus and trying to take phones away from students. Haha, yeah. And then the moment comes where fear really became real. Because according to witnesses and the police report, the driver pulled out a knife. And then, this is crazy, he started pouring gasoline across the bus. Okay, here teachers are tied, kids don't have their phones, everybody is freaking out. Now I want you to picture how horrifying this must have felt inside the vehicle. Here are children between 11 and 13 trapped inside a bus and a man screaming that no one is leaving alive. Can you imagine the panic in that moment? I can. I can just imagine the panic without all that. But the confusion, the crying, the absolute terror, probably some kids froze completely because fear does that to people. And what makes this even scarier is that investigators later said that the emergency hammers used to break windows had reportedly been removed from this bus. meaning that escape suddenly became almost impossible. And even according to reports, the driver was yelling things
like, "You're all going to die."
and other stuff, of course. But think how terrifying that sounds from a person driving the vehicle you're trapped inside. Now here's the part where the story honestly could have ended in a complete tragedy. The driver reportedly said he wanted revenge for the migrant deaths happening in the Mediterranean Sea. He was very, very emotional. He was very, very angry and unstable. And the situation inside the bus kept getting worse and worse by every second and every minute. The gasoline fumes were inside this enclosed bus. Children were crying. Teachers were trying to calm everyone as much as they could, as if they were also terrified themselves. And meanwhile, the bus again began moving again. And this, I think, is where the moment where most people, especially kids, would completely 100% panic. Because what do you do, even as a 13-year-old in a situation like that? Who prepares you for something like this? Nobody. And yet, one kid remained calm enough to think. And that kid was Ramy. So usually people ask this question: how in the world did a 13-year-old manage to save everyone? And honestly, this part is incredible. When the driver started confiscating phones from the students, Ramy secretly hid his own phone instead of giving it up. Already that takes courage. Because imagine getting caught in that moment. But he didn't just stop there. Ramy pretended he was praying in Arabic. And while pretending to pray, he secretly called his father. Now think about how smart that was for a second. At 13 years old, in complete chaos, surrounded by fear and uncertainty, somehow this kid had the presence of mind to disguise a rescue call as a prayer so the driver didn't realize what was happening. That is unbelievable composure for someone his age. And during the call, Ramy reportedly looked through the bus windows to read all the road signs and told his father exactly where the bus was going. Not approximately, not guessing, but exact locations. And meanwhile, his father was immediately contacting the police. The phone call changed everything. Because now the police were able to track the bus before the situation became even worse. Now this next part feels like pure chaos. Police vehicles eventually intercepted the bus near Milan. Teachers were reportedly trying to negotiate with the driver, while others desperately were trying to break windows to help the children escape. And then suddenly, this is unbelievable, the driver allegedly set the bus on fire. Can you imagine this for a moment? Smoke everywhere, children really screaming now, windows shattering, flames starting to go up, and the police rushing towards a burning vehicle trying to pull kids out before it's too late. Honestly, this sounds something from an action movie and a thriller at that moment of climax. But this was real. And somehow, miraculously, all 51 children survived. There were no deaths, there was no mass tragedy, and authorities later made it very clear that Ramy's quick thinking played a massive role in preventing disaster. Now here's where the story became emotional in a completely different way. After the rescue, people in Italy started calling Ramy a hero. Politicians started talking about him on television. News outlets everywhere were covering the story. And eventually, Italy's Interior Minister, Matteo Salvini, announced that Ramy would receive Italian citizenship for his bravery. Now think about how powerful that moment is. A child who was born in Italy, raised in Italy, and yet who still did not officially belong to this country beyond paper. He ended up risking his own life to save dozens of Italian children. And suddenly the entire country recognizes him as one of their own. Honestly, whether you agree with the politics or not, the moment is, emotionally, it does hit hard. Because courage has a way of cutting through all the arguments and paperwork and reminding people what real humanity looks like. But you know what really stays with me in this story? It's not the danger. It's not that there was a fire and all the chaos and everything else like that. It's not even the rescue. It was that in the middle of this complete fear, surrounded by panic, a 13-year-old kid somehow stayed calm enough to think about other people before himself. And that's rare. Even adults struggle to do that under pressure sometimes. Maybe that's why stories like this spread far and wide in our world around and come out. Maybe that's why stories like this spread around our world so quickly. Because maybe they remind us people that have courage don't always come out as soldiers or superheroes or trained professionals or even actors. Sometimes courage comes from a terrified kid on a burning bus, pretending to pray while secretly saving everyone around him. And honestly, that's incredible. And that's the story of Ramy Shehata, the 30-year-old boy who helped save 51 lives on a terrifying school bus hijacking in Italy. If this story moved you or made you remind you of another bus ride you've had, make sure you leave us a like, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. And even if you're new here, subscribe to Daniel Tells Stories, because every week we dive into real survival stories, kindness stories, heroic moments, and unbelievable true events from around the world. Definitely check out my other videos too, because trust me, there are more stories out there that are just as emotional, just as intense, and sometimes even harder to believe than this one. So before we go, let me ask you something. What do you think you would do in a moment like that? Would you stay calm enough to think clearly? Because honestly, I don't know if most adults would. Let me know in the comments. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.